Okay, good afternoon. There is a tiny change in terms of the presentation, meaning of the slides, that I don't go hour by hour, but it's now whenever there is a session, I just stop here and make a new session of slides, because it's difficult to prepare, and then you go into the other hour, and then you start from the scratch and whatsoever. Plus, it makes more sense to you as well that you can look at specific topics. And we are talking now again about industrialization. And I say again, because what you will see throughout the year or throughout your life, whenever you study, is that we are working with more or less small building blocks. They make more or less sense on their own, and they make more and more sense if they come together. It's simply, if you see a brick, you don't really know what to do with it. If you see a house, you know where it belongs. So in this way, we talked about many issues that play a role in what is called industrialization. And I say what is called industrialization it's a long process. It has different facets, and actually it has different interpretation or different terminology. We say industrialization is taking place at the end of the 18th, early middle of the 19th century, which is actually true on the one hand. It's a major step, because all this changes more or less in a more or less short period of time. The means of production, this is this major move from tools to machines, where we have a completely different approach to what production means. It is very much around the topic of mass production, which is now really getting dominant, becoming dominant. We have had production before with tools, mainly with tools, but we did not have machines. I mentioned this difference. The basis in terms of energy changed completely. Before it was hand-driven, if you want, manual work, the manufacture, manus, the hand, and it was driven by animals, the horse cart, the plow, whatsoever. Now we used different energy, fossil energies, that could not be reproduced. Coal. You cannot reproduce coal. Theoretically you can. Takes a couple of thousand years or millions, I don't know. But in this sense, you see, it is not reproducible. You can reproduce a tree that grows in a relatively short period of time. But oil, coal, this doesn't grow in terms of being usable again after a short time. This means as well the relations between human beings changed completely in terms of organizing their life, in terms of the resources they have had, in terms of how they produced and what they could produce. If you produce something en masse, something that can be stored for a long time, it is a different thing, different matter than producing something for a short period of time that has to be more or less immediately consumed. The way of organizing production and shaping society It was a new concept of mass production, which meant division of labor included. It was not the sole, individual worker, craftsman, but they moved together directly in space in terms of moving into a firm, or by combining different small outlets, different workshops, to one productive force. We talked about division of labor, referring to Adam Smith's example of producing a pin, but it was as well a matter for the entire society, which meant as well that the smallholder, the craftsman, owned basically the factors of production. Now, this was not completely true. You have had dependencies there. You have had the feudal system, which actually did not allow the development of machinery, the development of large industries. But at least there was a very close link, including you saw, you experienced what you had been producing. This was cut. Division of labor meant at the same time separation of labor, separation of different processes. You could do one single work, you could execute one single work that had been included then into different larger parts. Producing a screw, producing a tire. Actually, this was a large thing. You didn't produce an entire tire. This could go into different kinds of vehicles. You didn't know. It could go into completely different things, into a machine, because there are tires as well in machines. Division of labor, separation of labor, and most importantly, the separation of the division of power politically, which was a long process already since the 17th century, but as well the separation of the worker from the means of production. You did not own, you did not control anymore the machine you have been working with. You owned more or less the tools, but the machine you did not own anymore. I don't know what the problem is, compatibility between computers and systems. It should show these three pillars, where in the middle you see the relationship between people, between classes, and towards the environment, to nature. Let's begin with the left, the blue one. It is about utility production and growth. These are the main issues on which the process of production, the industrial process now, is based. It is not, as I said, the production of use value, but it is the production of exchange value. This is the decisive thing. Growth is the decisive thing. And of course, it cannot be growth of means with use value as such, but it was the idea of growth of gain. Karl Polanyi, go back to your notes, which have been mentioned here. Gain was the sole interest, and everything else was basically annexed. Of course you needed use value, because nobody would give you money to buy something if there is no use at all. But nobody was interested in providing goods to you that you could use. Not in your use, the use you made with it. If you have one of these USB flashes, if you use it for games, for business or just put it onto the shelf. As long as you buy it, fine. That's my purpose. What you use is a different thing. Of course, I have to make sure that you can use it. And then what it means the size, of course, the capacity, but you have as well these fancy things then that they look nice. Or you have this as well as a present by enterprises that give them to their customers with written on it, whichever enterprise it is. Advertising. The use value is advertising, not the USB flash. Of course, they are linked together. All this growth, utility production, is based on the idea of private property, of individualism. We have had this, we talked about the emergence of the individualism. Individual responsibility, individual gain, on both sides. On the side of the user was the private ownership of the user, obtained by the user, and private property on the side of the producer. Private property about means of production. This was the decisive thing of the entire industrialization in the strict sense as we talk about it here now. This second phase. The other side, again, looks at private property, but now as the institutional form, because institutions changed with this. It was not my tiny workshop somewhere, but I was privately owning something, means of production, and the machines. And it was about exchange, producing production as a matter of exchange for the market, because I could not use what I produced just for myself. There was the idea behind it. I produce for the market. I produce something that can be and should be exchanged. If it's not exchanged, if it's not going into the market, there is no point in producing it. Why should I produce something that I store, knowing that it will never, ever be sold? I do it for a short period of time, that I say, okay, in 1 month's time, in a year's time, I can sell it, or I can bring it to the market. But I won't produce it to say, it's just there. It's nice to look at it. I'm happy with it. And then you have the household here. And the household is the private household on the one hand, but it is as well the firm. You remember the one slide with the circularity of the capitalist process of production? Something goes into it, something comes out of it, and in the middle you have the firm and the household that are producing and consuming. Consumption is part of production. I produce the raw material, I consume the raw material, and somebody else uses what I produce with it. I produce and reproduce myself as worker, going to work, and sell my labor power to be consumed in the process of production. Now, as I said, it's a process. I mentioned something that was going on since the 17th century at least, individualization. This was condition of all this. It was a long process. Then we have this short period of industrialization of, let's say, 50 years, mainly in England. You can have different dates there. You can say even 100 years if you want. But the decisive moment is there was a different understanding of what industry means before. And there we speak of small and large industry. The small industry is being industrious, being busy with something, being busy with producing use value. This was the craft shop, the workshop, where I've been eager, where I worked hard. I worked very hard to survive, to avail of the means that I needed for my own personal reproduction. But I produced for myself, for small exchanges, direct exchanges. It was not mass production. Now, the new concept of the large industry is the success not of the busy person, not of the hard-working person, but of the person who is a good salesperson. This means directly the salesperson, and there are excellent salespersons. You are surprised when you leave the shop what you bought. You never ever thought about it that you could need it. But this is not only this kind of salesperson, but it is in general the orientation of I produce something, I sell something, I bring something to the market that people will be ready to pay for, and that people think actually they need it. These concepts, these old, if you want, anthropological concepts of needing something, remain in place. Need and want. But what it means is a different thing. What you really need is something that can be very limited in terms of physical existence, securing physical existence. That's food, something to drink, some protection according to the temperature or to the climate. And you see, actually, this is a social thing. And there we come to the third pillar in the middle. It is the matter of relations to ourselves as individuals. How do we see us, and what do we define as our need? What do we want? Personally, here and now, and as well in perspective. And we define this as legal personalities. We enter into contracts with others as individuals. There is no, in the strict sense, collective agreement. You have in law, you will come across it probably, you have collective agreements. What is called collective agreements, but they are only something that is an aggregate of individual agreements. Collective agreement, a typical collective agreement, is the agreement between the side of the workers and the side of the employers about income, wages, to which level, working conditions, and so on. The employer has to join by a contract a larger entity, the representation of employers. As employee, I enter literally a contract with my employer as individual, not as part of a collective workforce. Socially, yes, but legally not. So if I want legally to avail of the benefit of the collective agreement between employers and employees, I have to join a trade union, for instance, because they negotiate in the capitalist system with the employers. They two, employers and employees. If I'm part as individual of one of these collectives, I enter automatically by signing the individual contract, this collective agreement. Or, we talked about this, a firm, an enterprise, is a collective. But it is defined as legal personality to be able to enter an individual contract. And we talk about, of course, collective agreements. We talk about a social entity like a firm, even like a household, as not being individuals in social terms, but being something collective in legal terms. Division of labor is something technically as well linked to social issues. You have the one firm, the one country even producing this, the other that, which means on the one hand they have the technical basis to produce A, the others the technical means to produce B, and they exchange. So the exchange then, the subsequent exchange is a social process. More important is then the division, the relationship to ourselves, and the division into classes. Now, classes in sociology are very complex issues, how they are defined. Sometimes in economics as well, because actually we don't really work in economics with this concept of class. You have knowledge classes, you have political classes, you have classes based on consumption, on cultural behavior or whatsoever. But for economics, the really important part of social class is the ownership and non-ownership of means of production. This is decisive. This is decisive in terms of the control I can execute, I have over the process of production. If I own, on my own, one machine, I have more power economically than 20 workers who are depending on this machine. This is important. This is important for the entire distribution of wealth that we produce. There are differences, or there are details then, and we will come subsequently to them. Not all, even if I own the means of production, not all goes into my pocket. Taxation is the typical example of distribution, redistribution. Private ownership can mean the ownership by a collective. You have state-owned enterprises here in China. You have cooperatives in different countries playing a major role. In Finland, you find many cooperatives. These are, in a way, collectives owning the means of production. It's not going here, but it's going somewhere else. Somewhere else is a political question, where it actually goes, how it is distributed, and as well how it is gained. I always find it, well, not really funny, but in English language we always say funny if things are really silly. Microsoft produces, no, sorry, Apple, don't blame the wrong people. Apple produces iPhones for paying an extremely low wage, in several cases having miserable working conditions, and they get the money. And then they distribute it with their Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Now I can take another way and say, why do I exploit the people to such an extent that afterwards I have to pay for the damage with my foundation? Why? It's of course very mechanical, thought in a very mechanical way. Why don't I produce in another way, more sustainable, more work-friendly environment, that certain damage doesn't occur in first instance? This is the idea, for instance, of cooperatives. They say, we want to be active on the market, we want to make profit, But profit, part of the profit is providing good working conditions, providing protection of the environment during the process of production. Things may be a little bit more expensive, but at the same time, I don't have to pay afterwards to repair the damage. My profit rate may be a little bit lower, but for this, I don't have to pay for the damage I caused. The other point is that under harsh capitalist conditions, I don't pay anyway, because you as taxpayers pay or somebody else pays, or another country pays. So it is this relationship to nature that is playing a role there as well, as a matter of getting things relating to nature in the way we do. We can do it in very different ways. We can be protective, and we simply can be exploitative. And there you see it depends as well on technical aspects, on social aspects. It is this understanding of what is environment, and it is, as I say, a matter of which tools do we use, how do we approach it in terms of technology, if you want. And you see immediately, with a little bit imagination, this changes if you move from small industry to large industry. Central industrialization, large industrialization, is about growth as ultimate goal. Because only with growth you can maintain gain, additional gain. Only then you can do it. There's no other way. Replacement is not sufficient. If I only replace what had been consumed, I need relatively little. If I grow, I need more. Growth can mean buy a second car. It can mean buy a new car. It can mean buy a car and a bike and a motorbike and I don't know what. So this is the idea of growth. You produce towards more than you need, and with this, or this is based on the production of utilities, exchange values, that can be used, that have use value, and their maximization. These are goods. Goods now in the understanding of commodities. This is translated or understood as wealth. As more as we have, as more wealthy we are. And as more wealthy we are, as better we feel, as higher is our well-being and our welfare. It is then difficult to understand because we have to be careful. Of course, we know that this is not simply the entire truth. Having more does not mean feeling better. There is another problem in economics that if my wealth increases, it does not mean that the wealth of society increases. But the assumption is, if one is better off, there will be what is called trickle-down effect. What I gain, I cannot use it all, and there is this trickle-down effect. Something will be there for you. if I would be very bold now, it is the horse. There's something coming out of the back, and the little bird picks it up. That's what remains for many people then as well. Different formulation. I mentioned class differences. I mentioned the difference between, or the importance of looking at the property structure, control over means of production. And this means implicitly you have this of wage labor for the majority who do not own the means, who do not have control over the means of production. Translated into wage or income salary, and this secures the existence. Existence understood, again, in this context of growth, as more income as you have, as better it is, as more secure is your existence. Of course, it is true under these conditions. If you have an extremely high income, I didn't think about it before, so I didn't calculate it. Probably it's enough if you work 1 year. You just can lean back then, get into your rocking chair, and you have such a high income, that it's enough for the rest of the life. There are extremes where you don't believe the amount of money they have as income. Existence, good existence, secure existence. Another way of saying it, and there I highlighted the development. Growth as ultimate goal means that we have this development from equilibrium between human activity and, here I use the term contemporary world, nature, of which we are part. It's not out there, independent of us, but as you saw before, it is part, we are part of it. We are living in the middle of it. In which way ever we behave, the entire nature changes. It's as individuals, as societies. How we organize production, this influences this contemporary world, the environment that is out there. Of course, a river is out there, the air is out there, but it is part of this entire ecosystem. At an original state, you can say this is more or less a balanced development. As I said, you use certain sources of energy and they grow again after a while. As you only take as much as you need, they grow again. You won't overuse normally, not considering certain extremes, you won't overuse this contemporary world. If you are tired, you will sleep. You won't even be able to remain awake, to stay awake. At some stage, you can stretch it a little bit. At some stage, you simply fall and sleep. That we managed to do this at 12 o'clock or 12:30 now, this is human genius, that we are always getting tired at a certain time, namely when we have break. But this is this balanced use. And this means we are existing, we are securing our existence in this contemporary world because we are part of it. This is the equilibrium, human activity, contemporary world. This changes fundamentally with a large industrialization towards equilibrium of the markets. This is now, with gain, the new ultimate sub-goal, if you want. Equilibrium of the market, supply and demand. I always want to supply as much as there is demanded. And I try to increase this. And I always want to buy as much as I, in this mindset, as much as I can get from my wealth, from my income, from the wages, because this is wealth. Which means this dissociation between human activity and nature, and it is something that is not sustainable. Because now, I mentioned this keyword of fossil energy. We use more energy that is there because we produce more than we need. We can increase the productivity to an extent that goes much beyond the actual need. There is, of course, a moral dimension to it. There is, of course, a standard of we should not do this. I was just during the break doing a little bit of Greek philosophy. Aristotle, Sophocles, Antigone. Read Sophocles, Antigone. It is this money, it's only gain, it's nothing that has substance. This drives us. And it shouldn't drive us. But there is something else, and this is more important. It is the function and functions. How does this system actually function? Because you cannot simply step out. If an enterprise, if an entrepreneur steps out and says, no, I don't go with this, I'm modest, at some stage, very soon, he or she will be completely out. If you say, I don't need an income of, let's say, 10,000, 5,000 is enough for me. So instead of working 8 hours per day, I work 4 hours a day. If you are lucky, you'll find a job. If the system is mainly based on 8 hours work per day, it is simply not possible. We come to this at a later stage, working conditions and the organization of work in the firm. The simple hint, I cannot say I have a machine, but use it as you want. It's fine, if you only work 4 hours, fine. I don't mind. I want to have it, I want to see it working 24 hours per day. This means 3 times 8 hours. Simplified. So the system has certain requirements of functioning, and central are 3 functions. We talked about 2. Utility function is the function of my individual preferences. The bundle of goods, it's not individual goods, the bundle of goods I need so that I feel satisfied with what I have. Satisfied in terms as well of what allows me to function in society. Large industrialization was about this, changing what we needed in society. Before I had 1 shirt, that was enough. Now it was possible to produce shirts en masse now it was not enough anymore. It was redefining a social standard. Redefining as well the objectivity of the standard. Because socially you cease to exist, as simple as that, if you did not have certain goods in your property. You can see this in detail, looking at the size of accommodation, for instance, looking at the size of cars, looking at the amount of clothes we have. You can see this in quality. You don't have this, but this is really much better than what you have, even if it does the same thing. Phones are the typical thing, and computers. You don't have such a car. You don't go for holidays to this and that destination. That's much better. So it is about this, the individual preference, the individual's preference, each individual's. We cannot calculate it really on the societal level, but there is a social push, the social pressure, that brings us there to acknowledge that there is a preference, that we need something, and that without this we actually cannot do it. And there is another push towards it, which is actually an objective one. If you do not upgrade your computer, then you won't be able to work with it anymore. Simply because the programs, the software, are not compatible anymore with others, which is a problem. And as well because the software that is used today and sold today needs a certain capacity of the computer, of the hardware. Run an old program on a new computer, it won't work. Try to run today's software on an old computer, and when you start to install, the computer will say, not enough capacities, memory full, and all these nice things. So you have to upgrade. Otherwise you are out. As simple as that. Which goes hand in hand, if you want, with a production function. Second function, we are talking, when it comes to production, about input and output and input. But first we have to put something into the process of production. And then we get something out. The question is a twofold one. How much do we put into the production, into the process of production? And what do we put into it? Highly qualified labor force or not? Highly productive machines or not? I was once surprised. I have it, I don't know actually the name of these computers. It was a Compaq or something. Don't know if they still exist. And I thought, wow, this is really great. It's very fast. And then I saw an not an advertisement, a report on the decoding of DNS, and I thought, wow, this is the same computer, but this is really fast. So there is this development, and what we think may be high productivity is actually relatively low when it comes to absolute terms. So we come to the next, or we continue here after the break.